Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to the third episode of the series, The Ledger. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single episode of this series, in which the victims are cursed and turned into animals. You can also support us by liking the video and leaving your lovely comments. Enjoy the show.
There is a particular cruelty in laughter, the way a crowd can turn a person's worst moment into an evening's entertainment. I have always found comedians interesting for this reason. They learn earlier than most that pain is funny so long as it belongs to someone else. Tonight, my candle burns beside my open spine and my ink is stirring, because a woman who has spent her whole life laughing at others is about to give a room full of strangers something new to laugh at. Her. This is entry number 3. Her name was Renata Sharpe, and she was, by every measure that could be counted in ticket sales, the cruelest comic alive. 29 years old, razor-tongued, beautiful in a hard and glittering way, she had built an empire on humiliation. Her specialty was the roast, dragging ordinary people up from the audience and dismantling them for sport. Their weight, their clothes, their dead-end jobs, their nervous laughter, all of it fuel. "Comedy is just honesty nobody asked for," she liked to say. The crowds adored her for it. They always adore the one holding the knife, right up until she turns it on them. That night she was taping her biggest special yet, a sold-out theater, a wall of cameras, a red velvet curtain, and 1,000 people who had paid good money to watch her be vicious. Near the end of the set, a shy figure in the front row lifted something up toward the stage. An old leather-bound autograph book, worn and gold-edged, held out with trembling, worshipful hands. Renata took it the way she took everything, carelessly, as her due. "Aww," she cooed into the mic. "Somebody brought me a present." The crowd laughed on cue. She uncapped a pen. She did not read the line embossed on the cover. They never do. The line, had she bothered to read it, said, "For those who love to be laughed with." She signed her name across the open page with a bored flourish, a signature she'd scrawled 10,000 times, and handed the book back without a glance. But the ink did not sit on the page the way ink should. It flared gold beneath her name, then sank into the paper, drawn down like water into thirsty sand. And somewhere beneath the stage lights, a contract older than the theater itself quietly closed. Renata felt nothing. She strolled back to center stage, tapped the mic, and lined up her next victim in the crowd. She had time for one more. It began, as it must, with laughter. She opened her mouth to deliver the punchline, and instead of the punchline, out came a laugh. A sharp, sudden, barking laugh, too loud and too high, that doubled her over the microphone. The crowd chuckled, delighted. The great Renata Sharpe cracking herself up. She straightened, wiped her eye, tried again. And the laugh seized her a second time, harder, wilder, clawing its way up out of her chest without her permission. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. This wasn't a bit. She wasn't doing this. But the room was already roaring, and no one, least of all Renata, understood that the laughing had only just begun. Here is the terrible elegance of what I do. I never punish the cruel with what they fear. I hand them what they love, and I let it consume them. Renata loved laughter, the sound of 1,000 people laughing on her command. So I gave it to her, endlessly, from the inside. She clutched the mic stand and laughed until tears cut down her face, laughed until her ribs ached and her breath tore, and the audience laughed harder, clapping, filming, certain this helpless, cackling woman was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. She reached a hand toward them, and they read it as showmanship. No one in that theater knew they were watching a woman scream. It only sounded like a laugh. The change reached her eyes first. Mid-cackle, in the black glass of a dead camera lens, she caught her own reflection, and her stomach dropped. Her eyes, sharp, pale. The cold eyes that had stared down 1,000 hecklers had gone dark and round and gold. Wild amber eyes ringed with black, an animal's eyes staring out of her human face. She tried to say something is wrong, tried to call for the crew, for a medic, for anyone, and it came out as another whoop of helpless laughter. The crowd howled. Somewhere in the back, someone shouted that this was the best special of the year. Then came the fur. As she gripped the microphone, she felt her skin begin to prickle and crawl, and she watched in horror as coarse, tan and brown hair pushed up through the backs of her hands, dotted with dark spots, spreading up her wrists, climbing her neck. Her sequined sleeves strained against the thickening of her arms. She swatted at the fur, clawed at it, and only drew more of it to the surface, spot after spot blooming across her skin like a disease made of laughter. She looked out at the crowd, pleading now, mascara streaming, and 1,000 people pointed their phones at her and screamed with delight. And here is the first truth I have written beside every cruel name in my collection. Cruelty is a mirror the cruel never look into. For 9 years, Renata had stood on stages exactly like this one and taken the most frightened, most vulnerable people in the room and fed them to a laughing crowd. She had never once wondered how it felt to be the one under the light, changing, begging, while 1,000 strangers laughed at your ruin. Now she knew. She knew it completely. She reached her spotted, shaking hands out toward the audience she had spent a career tormenting, and they gave her back, in perfect measure, exactly the laughter she had always given them. Her body began to bend. She felt her shoulders bunch and hunch upward while her hips sank, her spine curving into a low, powerful, sloping arch. The unmistakable stance of a hyena. A ridge of coarse, dark bristles rose along her back, a wild mane pushing up through the shredding shoulders of her black, sequined blazer. She hunched over the microphone, no longer able to stand upright, her whole posture gone animal and wrong. The crowd, misreading it as physical comedy, gave her a standing ovation. Renata looked out at them from her hunched and changing body and understood, with the clarity of the doomed, that no one was coming. They thought this was the show. In a sense, it was. Then her face gave way. A deep pressure pushed her nose and mouth forward, out and out, into a broad, gray-black hyena muzzle. Her jaw widened with a low, grinding crack, and blunt, powerful, crushing teeth crowded into her stretching mouth. Her cackle warped as it went, deepening, breaking, curdling into something guttural and inhuman. She pressed her paw-heavy hands to her lengthening face, feeling the human woman she had been shoved forward into the shape of a scavenger. The animal that laughs, the animal that feeds on what is already fallen. It was, I will admit, a fitting mask. I had merely moved her true face to the outside. And here is the second truth, the one every laughing crowd eventually teaches its favorite. The crowd that laughs with you will laugh at you the moment you fall, because you are the one who taught them how. Renata had trained 1,000 people to find cruelty delicious. She had taught them, night after night, that a person's suffering was the finest entertainment money could buy. And now, as she stood hunched and half hyena on that stage, whooping and howling and unable to stop, her students performed their lesson flawlessly. They laughed at her exactly as she had taught them to laugh at everyone else. She had built her own audience. Now, it devoured her. Her hands went next. She held them up before her muzzle and watched her manicured fingers thicken and shorten and draw together, her nails darkening and blunting into stout black claws, coarse, spotted fur swallowing her knuckles and wrists. The hands that had gripped the microphone, that had pointed and gestured and dismissed so many people with a flick, sealed into the blunt, clawed paws of a hyena. She tried to hold the mic, and it tumbled from her grip, hitting the stage with a boom of feedback that the crowd took for a drum sting punchline. They cheered. She stared at her own paws, and somewhere far down inside the animal, the woman wept. Her legs buckled and reshaped. She felt the bones rehinge, her heels lifting, her legs shortening into the low, powerful, digitigrade hind legs of a hyena, her expensive heels splitting apart beneath her. Her trousers tore along the seams as her haunches thickened with spotted muscle. She dropped forward, catching herself on her clawed paws, no longer able to stand as a person stands, hunched now on all fours, low to the stage, a predator's frame where a woman had been. The theater shook with laughter and applause. A stagehand in the wings gave her a thumbs up, mistaking her collapse for a bravura bit of physical comedy. Her ears rounded and rose high on her skull, tan and spotted, swiveling toward the roar of the crowd. And for the first time she could hear the laughter the way an animal hears it. Vast, echoing, overwhelming, a wall of sound with no mercy in it anywhere. More fur swept over her scalp, around the sleek, jet-black bob that still, impossibly, framed her changing face. She flattened her new ears against the noise. She could not shut it out. There is no shutting out 1,000 people laughing at you. She had known that once, from the other side, and had called it a good crowd. The last of it came quickly. A short, bushy, dark-tipped tail pushed free at the base of her spine, and the final shreds of her black, sequined blazer split and slid from her spotted body, sequins scattering across the stage like fallen stars. What crouched at center stage now was no longer Renata Sharpe in any way a stranger would recognize. Only a spotted hyena in the tatters of an evening gown, her jet-black bob a strange human echo above a beast's face. She lifted her muzzle and let out a long, woo! Involuntary cry, and the sold-out theater rose to its feet, roaring, weeping with laughter, and gave the cruelest comic alive the biggest ovation of her career. At last, the show ended, the house lights rose, and the crowd filed out still, chuckling, still swapping clips, agreeing it was the wildest special they'd ever seen. That costume, that commitment, that voice. And in the sudden emptiness of the wings, behind the red curtain, the hyena that had been Renata caught sight of herself in a dark, backstage mirror. She reared up on her hunched legs and made herself look. A spotted scavenger looked back, jet-black bob and dark amber eyes and all, draped in torn sequins. She raised one clawed paw toward the glass, and the beast raised one too. She searched that reflection for the sharp, glittering woman who had walked out under the lights an hour ago, and found her only in the eyes, small now, and dark, and drowning. She huddled behind the curtain in the emptying dark, and pressed her paws over her rounded ears, and fought me the way they all fight me, with memory. Her name up in lights, the sound of a crowd obeying her, the particular poisonous joy of a perfect, cruel line landing to a roar of approval, all of it thinning now, drifting out of reach like applause fading down a hallway. And rising up beneath it was something older and simpler, the scavenger's calm, the wild patience of a thing that laughs not because anything is funny, but because that is the sound it is built to make. I'm Renata Sharpe, she thought, clinging to it. But she could no longer be sure the thought was in words. And here is the third truth, the one that waits at the bottom of every cruel life. A predator's laugh is the loneliest sound in the world. When the theater had finally emptied, no crew, no cameras, no crowd, the hyena stood alone in the dark backstage and let out a low, whoo, involuntary whoop, and the sound rang back off the bare walls with no one to answer it. All her life, Renata had needed an audience the way a fire needs air. Her cruelty had never been for herself, only for the laughter it earned. And now she had the laugh forever, welling up out of her whenever it pleased, and not one living soul who would ever laugh with her again. She had wanted the whole world laughing. She simply hadn't specified at whom. By the time the building went dark, the transformation was complete, and the creature that stood hunched at the center of that great empty stage was a hyena in every line and instinct, spotted, maned, wild, her sleek black bob the only ghost of the woman she had been. The manic terror had cooled into a flat, watchful animal calm. She lifted her muzzle toward the dead spotlight where she had commanded 1,000 people an hour before, and made her sound into the silence, and no one heard it. She was powerful in her scavenger's way. She was even, in the pitiless honesty of the stage lights, magnificent. And she was, at long last and forever, exactly the thing she had always been beneath the glitter. Something that laughs at the fallen. In the quiet of the empty theater, my pages stirred and settled, and her entry dried upon them. Signature, flaw, payment, balance. I have collected jesters and tyrants and every cruelty in between, and I will tell you what I told each as they crouched in the dark. I have never once taken anything that was not freely offered. She took the book. She signed the line. She gave 1,000 strangers her name and her laughter, exactly as she had given them everyone else's pain. And the room gave it all back to her, in kind. That is the entire art of it. My candle guttered low beside my closing cover. Entry number 3. Paid in full. You may wonder what becomes of a woman who spent her life laughing at others. I will tell you, for the ending is the honest kind. She lives in a wildlife park now, in a sunny enclosure behind a low fence, catalogued by the staff as an unusually striking spotted hyena of unknown origin. Families come on weekends. Children press to the rail and point at her strange dark crest of hair, at her wild amber eyes, and they laugh, delighted, careless, cruel in the innocent way of the young, at the funny hunched animal that sometimes lifts its head and whoops as if it were telling a joke. Renata Sharpe is laughed at every single day now, by strangers under bright lights forever. She always did say she'd die on stage. Back in the theater, they never did explain it. The star who walked out under the lights and simply never came back. The footage was too strange to air and too good to delete. It circulates still in the dark corners of the internet. 1,000 clips of a beautiful, cruel woman laughing herself into something else while a crowd howls along. Some say it was the greatest piece of performance art ever staged. Some say it was a warning. On the swept and silent stage, in the place where she last stood as a woman, there is only a single microphone and a scatter of black sequins no cleaner ever quite manages to gather up. But enough of her. My candle has been relit, and already my quill is moving on its own, because the ink chooses far faster than I can tell these tales. A fresh page, a new heading, drying in glowing ink. Entry number 4. The silhouette forming beneath it is a woman at a glittering party, reaching out with envious hands to touch and to copy the guest beside her, to steal her laugh, her dress, her life. And her own reaching shadow has already begun to shift, its skin breaking into a slow, scaled, color-changing ripple. She has never once been content to be herself. Soon, she will not be able to be anyone at all. The ledger disagrees with her, and the ledger never runs out of pages.